Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on partnering with school and business officers and homeless liaisons on ARP HCY funds. We are so glad you've joined us. My name is Erin Patterson. I'm Director of Education Initiatives with Schoolhouse Connection. I want to share a few housekeeping updates and reminders about our session today. This webinar will last 1 hour, and we ask that you please type any and all questions you have into our Q&A box. We will answer either directly through that Q&A box or say them out loud at the end of the webinar during our Q&A portion of our time together today. This session is being recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording via email follow-up, and we'll also post this webinar on Schoolhouse Connection's archived webinars page. You'll also receive a copy of the slides as well. If you are not familiar with Schoolhouse, we are so glad you're here today. Just a little bit about us. We are a national nonprofit advocacy organization, and we provide practical assistance and policy advocacy to overcome homelessness through education. We work at a number of levels, including on federal and state policy, national awareness, state and local practical assistance, and we always say the jewel in our crown is our network of young scholars who have experienced homelessness themselves and who we are privileged to support both through financial assistance and also case management support as they navigate the post-secondary world. We encourage you to check out our website, schoolhouseconnection.org. You can sign up for our newsletter. We send out about 1 e-blast per week. And we always encourage folks to check out our Q&A from our inbox. This is where we post a lot of the questions that we receive. So chances are if you have a question about serving your students experiencing homelessness, we've likely already answered it, and you might find the information you need there. We want to start today with a quick overview and reminder about the U.S. Department of Education's updated Dear Colleague letter about the use of American Rescue Plan homeless children and youth funds. This official guidance from the department was released on September 12th, 2023, several months ago. And in it, they ask states to expedite funding, including by modifying administrative procedures at the state level. This is one concern we've been hearing over and over, that a lot of those procedures are creating barriers to the spending of these funds. The department also encouraged people to circulate this letter widely, including to superintendents, school business officers, and other administrators who might be involved in spending decisions, but not directly involved in the homeless education program. You can find a 2-page overview of ARP HCY allowable uses on our webpage, and it's also linked in these slides. And again, you will receive a copy. Just to quickly review some of the allowable uses that the department emphasized in that September letter. First, motel stays of longer than 3 days are allowed if, quote, reasonable and necessary to allow children and youth to attend school, and as a last resort when other funding resources are not available. The department also emphasized that LEAs may use ARP HCY funds for the purchase of vehicles for specialized transportation of homeless children and youth. Other ways you can use funds for transportation include reimbursing parents and youth for gas costs, purchasing prepaid gas cards, and paying for limited car repairs, again, if those costs are reasonable and necessary. The department clarified that ARP HCY funds may be used to provide food assistance, to help assist homeless students take advantage of educational and extracurricular activities, and when food is not available through other sources, such as free school meals. The department also emphasized that ARP HCY funds may be used to purchase cell phones, hotspots, hygiene products, and washers and dryers. We do want to emphasize some of the uses of funds for early childhood that are outlined in the September letter. First, the department emphasized that ARP HCY funds may be used to provide early childhood education to young children aged birth to 5 who are not formally enrolled in the LEA, but who are experiencing homelessness in the LEA. School districts can also use their ARP HCY funds for activities that transition children to kindergarten. This could include coordinating screenings, referrals to other early childhood programs, activities to determine eligibility for subsidy, and early intervention services. And importantly, they did clarify that funds can be used for transportation to those services. That is an allowable use in the early childhood space. And lastly, to round out our highlights from the allowable uses Dear Colleague letter, in terms of transition to post-secondary education, US Ed emphasized that these funds can be used to assist youth and their parents or guardians with completion of the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, which has been updated, including many other college readiness and college access activities. One example is adding staff hours to provide this assistance. ARP HCY funds may also be used to pay for college application expenses like registration fees, preparation materials, entrance and placement exams, and any other fees that might be associated with college applications. And then lastly, on the transition to post-secondary front, ARP HCY funds may be used to hire graduation coaches or pay stipends to counselors so that they can conduct transcript audits in order to help award partial credits and ensure that students are on track for graduation. And with that, I want to turn directly over to our friends from Monterey Unified Public Schools today, Donnie Everett and Ryan Altmeyer, who are going to tell us exactly how they have been implementing ARP HCY in their district. So Donnie, I think I'll turn it to you first.
Thank you, Erin. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you. And before I even jump in, I just want to take a moment and just thank each of you and acknowledge the amazing, complex, challenging work of supporting the youth and families of your communities on a day-to-day basis. Truly is amazing, and it's a privilege for Ryan and I to be here with you today and share some information and some examples of what we've been able to do as a district to serve the needs of our youth experiencing homelessness, and really just the partnership that it's taken with Ryan and I to come together and work through some of the challenges that many of you may face and think about often when you're wanting to implement innovative programs to support challenging needs of your family. So really looking forward to this today. We're planning on to cover a few things in our time together. Want to give an overview and context to our district to give you a little bit of idea of the why behind the work that we're doing. I want to go over some of the supports and programs that we've been able to implement using the ARP HCY funding, specifically in terms of some innovative things that we've been able to do, which then leads to a lot of questions around what that partnership looks and the importance of connecting and working closely with your school business office and your school business officer in being able to approach some of the fiscal compliance questions, considerations, things that often can feel like barriers to implementing innovative programs. So that's our goal for today. So look forward to going and jumping in. So we'll go to the next slide. So a little bit of an overview of these demographics of students we serve, specifically youth experiencing homelessness. So for those of you who don't know, Monterey is on the central coast of California. We are very lucky to live in a very beautiful place. And with that, it's a very high tourist area. People from all over the world. Is a destination site. And as you can imagine, the cost of living in our area is extraordinarily high. One of the main sources of employment in our area is the hospitality industry. So as you can imagine, many of our families, just in order to live in the area, it's very difficult due to the high cost of living. To give you an idea of a breakdown of our demographics of students we serve, at the end of the 22-23 school year, we had 9,852 total students, and that's TK through 12. Of that population, we had identified over 2,100 students who qualified under McKinney-Vento. That represents 22% of our student population that had housing insecurities. Of that 22%, the majority, almost 90%, were doubled, sometimes tripled up with other families, again, due to financial hardship. But we did have some families living in local shelters in our area, in motels, hotels, and a number of our families who were unsheltered and even dwelling out of their vehicle. So just wanted to kind of give context. As you can see, 22% of our student population is a very significant percentage. And so that has really driven the need for us to focus in as much as we can on serving the needs of our youth and families who are in these particular very difficult circumstances. Next slide. So kind of just, again, I want to emphasize before going into the specific programs, and I want to kind of plant a seed with you if this is not already something that you've considered, is for school districts and LEAs that are really looking at building the supports and responding to the needs of families. What we have done in terms of our own model, specifically in regards to creating a system and supporting youth and families, is we've taken a framework that our district has already invested in and utilized in responding to student needs, whether that be academic, behavioral, social, emotional, and we're looking through a multi-tiered systems of support framework. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that framework, looking at it through 3 tiers. Tier 1 being what all students have access to. Tier 2 being for some students who need a little bit more support and help, what interventions, responding supports are there. And then at a tier 3 level, really individualized, acute, very more direct needs specifically to individual students with much more higher needs. And so we've utilized that framework similarly of how we've approached our work around supporting our youth experiencing homelessness. We titled it BEST, RMPUSD BEST, Building Equitable Supports Through a Tiered System. And really that's allowed us to ensure that we are meeting the needs and finding the gaps and knowing where to plug in supports in a very clear systematic framework. And I just want to highlight that. And again, for those of you be thinking about how you might be using within your school districts or LEAs a framework that's already there to be able to continue and develop that with your program. Next slide. Okay, and getting into some of the examples that we have in utilizing the funding, wanted to provide these as a reference point, and it could be these may be supports that you're already providing or in the process of providing, but ultimately as we built these out and thinking about the funding that's utilized, as Aaron mentioned at the beginning, really using that. And then as we go through this, maybe thinking about the questions that you can imagine have come up for us that Ryan and I have had to really talk through in order to make things happen that are unique to a school district and serving families. So I'll start with the resource centers. Ultimately, being able to have direct access for our students to get basic needs was a really important component to have into place. And what we did was we looked at, again, removing barriers of access. So being able to develop resource centers at each of our school sites that students can access clothing, shoes, hygiene products, school supplies, and at our high schools, being able to have washer and dryers on hand that students can utilize as well. This at a tier 1 level that all students have access to was really important. Again, utilizing the funding that we had through ARP HCY, we were able to stock, and we continue to stock these resource centers at all of our sites. Now, they look differently at each site. The high schools and middle schools, our larger sites, tend to have a little bit larger and more stocked, whereas our elementary are a little bit smaller, but at least having an access point for students to get access to basic services. Next slide. And then in addition to that, we knew it was important to really have a hub for our district that families can access, and a larger resource center that we have developed and actually placed centrally to our school district for easy access for our families. And this is a place where educational liaisons or homeless educational liaisons are actually located. So this is a place where families can go, again, get direct access to basic needs, including what you see here. It's a larger building, so we were able to stock at a larger number of items at this building. But one of the important pieces that makes this unique is that our liaisons are there as well. And so it allows our families to connect directly with our liaisons and to be able to identify other needs that might be present that the family might have, and to be able to build those connections and relationships with our families to be able to have that, again, individualized personal connection for our families. Again, utilizing the funding sources to be able to keep this stocked, as well as our staffing. And I didn't mention that we as a district have invested into our staffing. We internally have 3 educational liaisons, and then we have a partnership with a local nonprofit organization that also provides 2 additional educational liaisons focused at our high school. So we have a total of 5 educational liaisons supporting our TK, our preschool, all the way through 12 programs. Next slide. Okay, so it was mentioned, Aaron mentioned too in the update there around storing gas cards. And so just wanted to highlight this as something that we begin to implement as well. And One of the questions that often comes up is really the check and balance system. How can we ensure that our families who are in need and having access to store and gas cards, are they spending those appropriately? Are they using those in the way that we hope in order to support their children, like which the intention of this is for? And so we thought very deeply about that as a team, really come together, and we knew it was important to really develop a protocol and procedure around access for our families, not making it complicated, but being able just to have a system in place that we knew that we were identifying families who were in need, and in providing these resources to families, asking that families in return just provide those receipts and ways to be able to show that this funding and these services were actually meeting the needs that they were intended to meet. So with that, we do ask our families through the process in our liaisons working directly with our families to provide a receipt on the expenditures of the gas and store cards to be able to show that those were used in the right way. Part of, again, you thinking about the gas cards is really helping our families with transportation, ultimately, so our students are attending school on a regular basis. And so that's an important factor, and that we're monitoring as well, as that families who are utilizing gas cards, that their students' attendance is regular. So that's again another kind of check and balance for us to ensure that they're being used appropriately. If a family does not, and this is again conversations with our liaisons, but if the receipt is not provided by a family, they are aware that they would no longer be able to take part in this program. And so far, that has not been a concern for us in implementing this, but it is an awareness that our families have, and there's an understanding that's a part of our process with this as well. And so I want to just highlight that as that I know that question comes up in terms of our families utilizing these in the way that they're intended to. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to a little bit more complicated challenge, but a program that we're extremely excited to have been able to initiate. Since I've been with the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, a common need that came among our youth and many of our families who had housing insecurities was around the need at various points in the year of emergency short-term housing. And so this was very complicated for us, as there were no access to hotel vouchers in our area. And if we were able to get a hold of a voucher, many of the hotels in our area didn't accept the vouchers. And so it was a constant need. And fortunately, through the ARP HCY funding, we were able to really think about this more strategically and have direct access to funding. The question was, how do we create a systematic approach to being able to make this work? So this is an example of one that I had conversations with Ryan about in terms of what do we need to know? What do we need to have in place in order to make this work? Everything from the liability end to knowing what the nightly rates are, to having a system that we have identified families and internally being able to make the reservations. So fortunately, we were able to make that happen. We chose Motel 6 initially just because we happen to have a Motel 6 location at each of the cities that we support of our school sites. And so it worked out great that I was able to connect directly with the corporate program connection at Motel 6, and was able to really link into a program they already had called the Corporate Plus program, whereas companies were able to send their employees out for work-related things, and they were able to handle the reservations and payments directly through the corporate office. So because they had that infrastructure in place already, we were able to easily join into that. As you can see, through this program, we've developed an identification process, a referral process. There's a whole protocol that's in place. There's an agreement and a consent that parents understand what the policies are of Motel 6, as well as understanding that it's a minimum 3-night, can be a more extended stay in certain cases, and understanding what that looks like. This has been a very positive program for us, that we've been able to meet the needs of families very quickly. Within one day, have been able to meet the needs of families to get access to emergency housing through Motel 6. And has been a very positive thing in our relationship with hotel owners, and overall have had no concerns, issues, and have really met a lot of needs through this. So we're very excited about it. I'll just mention too, as we get through, and hopefully I can remind myself to come back to this, but I'm happy to share any information more about this. I often get questions questions around this in terms of what that protocol agreement looks like, I'm happy to share that information if you reach out directly to me, and I'll give my contact information at the end here, and happy to share that with you, or even join in a conversation with you and talk that through a little bit more. Next slide. And the question just came up, I see, in terms of the agreement. I'm happy to share the agreement. And yes, actually, within the agreement itself, and liability is addressed, and it is removes liability from the district with any property damage within the agreement that we have with Motel 6. That was a very important part of it, and Ryan was really good at reminding me that and being able to review that to ensure that that wouldn't hold the district liable. And he'll talk more about that as well. But yes, that was a very important part, and I'm definitely happy to share that. Wanted to talk about a couple programs very quickly that actually do not use the ARP HCY funding, but I think is important to consider as you're thinking big, and if you're thinking about wanting to meet the needs of families that the funding source may not specifically address. I just hope that through this can encourage you to continue to think big, think innovatively, and there are likely options to be able to work through some of the challenges. So I'll start with a safe parking program. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we have a number of families who are dwelling within their vehicles, and we've been wanting to figure out a way to really provide a location and a safe place for our families to park. And we were very fortunate in our area to have a nonprofit organization called One Starfish that already coordinated safe parking programs throughout Monterey County. And so in connecting with them, we were talking through the possibility of offering one of our own site locations as a place where families can have a safe place to park overnight. But the one caveat to this was our board was a little nervous and really didn't have direct funding to cover all the costs that would be associated. So our ask to One Starfish was, hey, if you can help and we can work together on finding a grant that would cover the cost of the actual coordination efforts, we would be willing to provide the location, keys, bring everything up to code in order for the city to be able to approve the permit for this. We'll identify the families, all of the work on the front end, if they could help provide the funding for all of the specifics around the program itself. And fortunately, we were able to work that through. One Starfish received a grant. And so really excited that we're in the newly phase of launching this at one of our sites. And it's really exciting that we'll have this. And just want to be able to share as well that, again, as you build out your supports, as you build out your systems, as you get the message out of what you're doing to support families, you'll be surprised about other partners that want to join you in this work. And so that is something that I just want to highlight. Next slide. All right. And finally, in terms of programs, I wanted to touch upon this too as well, as it was really out of the box thinking and one that ultimately was a long-term goal of ours. And as I'm sure it is for all of you, being able, the ultimate goal for your families experiencing homelessness or with housing insecurities to be able to get access to long-term housing. That is the ultimate goal that we all share and that we want. And so as we begin to ask questions and survey our families in terms of the challenges and the barriers that were coming in to get access to long-term housing. The consistent barrier that came up was the upfront cost. We had many families that could actually afford the monthly payments, but being able to cover the last month's rent, security deposit was just next to extremely challenging for our families even to get access. The average upfront cost in our area, as an example, is right around $6,000 just to get into a house or be able to rent an apartment or a house. And so that was a major barrier. Fortunately, again, because we worked so hard to build a system, promote what we're doing, get it out in the community, we had a local private foundation who was interested in taking part in providing the funding source specifically related to this particular need. And so after working through a number of just working through what that looks like, we were able to really develop what we call the Family for Housing program, which is providing that upfront cost with all of that funding coming from a private foundation. So the district, all we are doing as a district is identifying the families, gathering the information needed to make sure that the families would qualify, but the funding itself is coming from a private foundation. And the checks that are cut is actually coming through another nonprofit organization who is willing to cut the checks so that the money is actually not going through the school district directly related to this, but we are the conduit for our families getting access to this. And again, this has been hugely successful. We just recently have been able to help our 13th family get access to long-term housing. This is a fairly new program for us, and all 13 families currently are still in living in their housing and still are there. So it's been a very successful program. But again, thinking through as you think about these out of the box thinking, what we really had to consider and develop was the process, being able to, how are our families identified? What are educational liaisons' role in terms of we're identifying? What's the information we needed to gather in order to ensure that they would qualify for this, whether that be verification that they were accepted into the housing. We asked that they provide consent in terms of us being able to use their academic data to show the foundation how this is positively impacting their students having access to their education. I will be happy to say we've done our first report to the foundation recently. Attendance has improved for all of our students taking part in this. All of our students are on track to graduate. All of our students have had improvements in their math and ELA scores academically. There's been a decrease in behavior. So we're already seeing a direct correlation between helping bring stability and providing this to families and the success that it's bringing to our students academically, which is the ultimate goal. So wanted to just share that with you. All of this, as you can imagine, lots of questions, lots of challenges. And so I'm excited to turn it over to Ryan, who will talk through, as we've worked together, some of the considerations that you would have. Oh, forgot one more slide. I apologize. Here's just some data that you can see, some comparative data, just to show that the programs we are developing are impacting students positively. Obviously, we want to make sure that what we're doing in supporting our families is actually contributing to the student success educationally. And so you can see here that our graduation rates have increased significantly since 2018. We are well above even our statewide graduation rates for youth experiencing homelessness. So we're very proud about that and also in terms of our discipline has decreased significantly, well below even the statewide percentage as well. So just wanted to highlight that the work that we are doing, we're monitoring our data to ensure that it's actually meeting the needs of our students that way. So now I believe I'm going to turn it over to Ryan and to really talk through some things to consider as you work with your business offices and those that really have direct impact on the funding. So Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Donnie. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you all for participating today. Really, I want to share some perspective and hopefully equip you with some strategies to help further the great work that you're all doing and have those conversations with the big bad business office and really help move this work forward. So really, I think the first thing and from my perspective as somebody who oversees all of the finances for a district, making sure that we stay fiscally solvent. We do all the things where we're not putting ourselves in jeopardy, giving funding back to the state or the federal government. Really just looking at lots of different areas that could potentially, cause some issues. So when people are prepared or individuals are prepared and they come to us with a plan, it makes that conversation a whole lot easier. So as we look at in this particular funding source, right, something that I'm looking at is who's in charge of the program, who's going to be the person who's going to oversee it, who's the person do I go to when there's questions about allowable expenses, who do I go to with questions around reporting, or who do I direct my team to when there's questions that inevitably will come up through various aspects of implementation of the program. And so it's really important that you understand what's allowable. I can't state that enough. I rely on my team to be the experts, and Donnie is an expert in this area. So when I do have questions, I know I can reach out to him, and he really understands his program, and it makes that process of implementation a whole lot easier. But then also knowing who you go to for help, right? So who are your internal resources that you can go to within the school district, who's assigned to, from the fiscal side, who's helping you oversee some of the fiscal components of the program. but also your state and federal resources. So who do you go to when you have questions around implementation, if something's allowable, if it's not allowable, a certain strategy, those sorts of things. And then also there is a level above that, that, especially here in California, I can't speak to, how all structures are across the country. But in California, each school district is subject to an independent audit annually. So there are compliance components that we want to make sure that we're aware of. So you understand, like, hey, it's not just an internal practice that we're our process that we're going through. There are individuals outside of our agency who are looking at and auditing the fiscal aspects of the school district and things of the programs, right? They have a list of documents. Or auditors have an audit guide, and they're for specific programs. They have certain things that they're looking for. So it's really important to understand that, and even ask your business office, hey, what things are our auditors potentially going to look at? So it helps you prepare for ultimately when you're faced with those questions. Next slide. Actually, I'm sorry. Can we stay on this slide for one more second? I forgot one important thing. Develop a process for budgeting and tracking. If you can, I know this is kind of small, but this is just kind of an example. I know we received through COVID, we received a lot of one-time infused money from the federal government. And it was difficult to track all of that. But when you're implementing a program, the business office, it really helps facilitate those conversations if you have a process for budgeting and tracking your expenses. So it's knowing, what the dollar amounts are that you have, what are your planned expenses, knowing where you're at with expending that in the time frames that you have to spend it. And then also including on there allowable expenses, other resources, and then sharing that with the appropriate people, because it really helps provide clarity into the process, and then it helps us in the business side really help move your vision forward when we have a clear budget, so that we know we're not having to go back every time. Oh, was this in your budget? Is this something new? It really makes it easy for us to know, hey, these things were already budgeted for. So as we have these conversations, we know we know we're operating within the parameters of the budget. Next slide. And then when you're talking with individuals who are trying to move this forward, specifically in the business office, you're probably going to get a lot of questions. But it's important to really spend the time and talk to them about, just not just the numbers. Be prepared to explain the problem. When you walk into a business office, or you're walking to your fiscal people, they often are just behind a desk most of the time. They're not out in the field seeing the impact that the work is having. So I would suggest connecting with those individuals, inviting them along to see the work that you're doing, so it really connects them with the work. So as they're seeing, some of the fiscal components come through, they're really connected to it, and they understand it's not just a number, right? They're connecting it back to the work and really the individuals and the lives that we're impacting with what we're doing. And it really goes back to getting your team on board. So if you have a group of individuals who are supporting, or if it's just a one person team, making sure you have that outlined and everybody knows who the team members are, so that everybody's on the same page, and that we can support you and the team when issues arise. And I think one of the most important things is be part of the conversation. So know who you need to go to further these conversations. So if you're being hit with no, we can't do that, or it causes too many issues, we don't want to we don't want to implement it that way. And a lot of the work that you're doing is really kind of outside the realm of what has been traditionally done in a lot of school systems. So you're gonna face some of these challenges quite often. So be part of the conversation. Know your hierarchy. In our district, we have an executive cabinet team that works directly with the superintendent. Donnie and myself are on that. So he overseeing this program, we have a direct kind of connection to be able to work through these challenges and have that dialogue. If your structure is a little bit different, know who you need to connect with, so you're having those conversations and be part of that conversation. Next slide. And I'll spend a little bit of time here. So as business officials, we're really risk adverse, right? Our role is to make sure that we're setting our organization up for success, that we're not putting ourselves that could open us up to potential liability, lawsuits, having to pay out large settlements, whatever that might be. So as you're doing this work, it's important to think about ways we can shift the liability, because here we're really talking about things like motel stays, right? Those aren't traditional things that we do for people who aren't our employees, right? We're talking about paying for expenses like gas, like groceries. So really being thoughtful about, hey, okay, we really want to engage in this. We know it opens the district up to liability. Coming in with that mindset up front and being thoughtful on how we can shift the liability. That conversation, how it happened with Donnie, is he had this great idea of like, hey, it'd be awesome if we could provide some temporary housing for our families in greatest needs. And so immediately, the alarm bells are going off. It's like, wait a minute, we're going to be paying for people who aren't our employees to stay at hotels. There's a lot of liability that goes there. But before that conversation had happened, Donnie had already thought about some of those things. So we were able to work together to determine how can we shift that liability or move it away from the district and still be able to provide the service that was much needed. Engage directly with outside agencies. You'd be surprised how many individuals are willing to work with you, and you might get told no, right? So in this case, Motel 6, just using that as an example, they were willing to work with us. Other hotels weren't. So you don't want to just, when the first door closes, don't stop there. There will be companies that will work for you, and don't think that the corporate structure is so convoluted that you can't get through to somebody who will want to help you. Motel 6 is a large organization. We were able to connect with the right people who understood the problem and were willing to work with us in this particular instance, on the liability. But also, as Donnie alluded to, there's other outside agencies who, once you start engaging in this work, they will want to help you. Whether that's going to be philanthropic organizations who want to donate money to help solve this challenge, or at least help with the challenge. We have examples of where early on, during the pandemic, we had several families who were severely impacted by that. They were unhoused. We had some agencies coming to us and, hey, we want to donate money to your district. We want to pay for some temporary housing for these families. How can we help you do that? So what we did is we worked directly with an organization called the Salvation Army, and we were able to get this outside agency to donate money directly to the Salvation Army, with the caveat that it would go to support temporary housing for our families. So we didn't directly administer that. We weren't part of the process, but our families directly benefited from that partnership. So think about ways that you could accomplish these things with other outside agencies as well. And then be a problem solver. So work, not within the limitations, but work around the limitations. Sometimes we'll have to work in the gray, and that's okay. Our job is really to find ways that we can support our families. And if you come with a good plan and you come with understanding, okay, where are the clear limitations, but where can we operate within the gray, you'll be able to further those conversations a little bit more. And it's helpful for me when I'm having these conversations around, certain things that are out of the norm, like hotel stays and whatnot, to really think about, okay, what are the full clear parameters, so then we can work around them. And then I think the last thing that I'll cover is the governance structure. Use your governance structure in your organization is for promotion and compliance. And what I mean by that, in California, we have a school board who oversees and approves ultimately all the contracts and expenses and everything that we do as an agency. So it's really good to get in front of them. It promotes the work. Do things in that you can to promote the good work that you're doing, so that they can see, hey, here's what we're really doing to be impactful to our families. So they understand the work that you're doing, but also for compliance. If there's ever something that we think maybe it's an allowable expense, and I get this often, I hear this often, oh, we can't do that because it's a gift of public funds. And that may or may not be true, depending on what you're trying to do, but it's often not the case. I think there's ways you can circumvent that. And one of the ways is getting your school board or your governing board to approve those expenditures if the school board or your governance structure approves the expenditures that they deem appropriate to further our mission is really, and our mission is to make sure that our students we educate our students. If they deem whatever it is that we're doing appropriate, then that's an appropriate expense. So I wouldn't let hey, it's a gift of public funds always be the line that you're hearing. I think you can use your governance structure to really promote that, and also to provide the opportunity for those things to be eliminated around, the gift of public funds. Okay. Donnie yeah, I'll turn it back over to Donnie.
All right, thanks, Ryan. So yeah, I had mentioned about the MPUSD BEST website. So here's a link to the website. We've developed this just as a direct resource. So there's a lot of resources here if you're interested that we put into place. And again, thinking about it through a multi-tiered systems of support. There's a number of different resources for you, everything from ways that we've identified our families to ways that we've set a prioritization in terms of prioritizing how our educational liaisons are responding to families and being able to have that structure. So really, hopefully this is as a help to many of you. Again, if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to myself or Ryan. Happy to answer any questions that might come up for you today after the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you both so much, Donnie and Ryan. I'm going to jump back in here. We have several questions coming in. We have a lot of praise and accolades. And so just want to say thank you so much for being willing to share your process, how you're using these funds, and how you're able to make it possible. I do want to go to our Q&A box and encourage our participants to submit some more questions if you have them. I want to acknowledge a really good question that came in initially around if you give food or gas card to a family, is a receipt required by ARP? And the clarification being, I get a receipt for the gift cards. Our family is required to give receipts for what they use the card for. And so we want to emphasize to you all that the U.S. Department of Education has not specified any tracking measures in their guidance. We do encourage everyone to check with your local school business office to make sure you are abiding by whatever policies and procedures they have set. That is a district level decision often. And we have worked with districts who do not require receipts. Other districts do at different levels. And so we want to make sure that you are getting the most accurate information. So thank you for that question. I want to pose some questions to you all, Donnie and Ryan, from our Q&A box here. The first question that came in was, it was stated that the district resource site was used by all students. And so just wanting to clarify if this was used by only McKinney-Vento students or all students in the district. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, definitely can talk about that. Yeah, so these resource centers were identified specifically for our youth experiencing homelessness. But as our educational liaisons and our sites are working with families, there might be particular needs or students that we are recently learned that we may not have identified yet, but recently learned are going through challenges, particularly housing insecurity challenges that we're able to respond to immediately. But just want to emphasize that how we have shared the information, we really, from a site level, being able to respond to youth that really do have these particular needs. I will say that how we've stocked a resource center, a particular hub, that is really geared towards our youth experiencing homelessness. If students who were not identified as experiencing homeless do have particular needs, then our sites are working directly with them to find ways to be able to respond to their particular needs that they may have.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to keep an eye on our Q&A box and our chat. I think people are putting questions into both. Our next question, and Donnie, I'm going to go back to you for this one. The question says, the listed items on one of your slides, such as diapers, wipes, did you use your American Rescue Plan funds to cover that? And the participant says, monies have been said to only cover the needs like food, clothing, hygiene, et cetera, of school-age children. So I'm going to quickly give an overview of what Ed said, and then would love for you, Donnie, to talk about how you all all are able to fund those items. Again, the U.S. Department of Education in their September Dear Colleague letter did in fact specify and emphasize that ARP HCY funds may be used for early childhood activities, particularly under the umbrella of school readiness. And so if you are in contact with a family who has a younger child who is not yet school age, but they are in need of supplies like that, we would absolutely argue to make a case for using your funds for those needs and supplies. And it can definitely fall under the umbrella of school readiness from Schoolhouse's perspective. But Donnie, would love for you to talk about those needs in your community and how you're able to fund those.
Yeah, thanks, Erin, for that as well. So yes, I mean, our business office and team are work very diligently to ensure that what we cover and the expenses we have do fall under the specific requirements of the funding that we have. I will just, Ryan, if I could put you on the spot here, you know, we've had conversations around other funding sources, particularly for certain needs that they're kind of questionable or may not fall directly under what's specified under the funding sources. Could you give some examples, Ryan, about how, and you mentioned it, I think, in terms of how you were like your governance board is a way of being able to confirm the coverage of funding sources if they deem it appropriate. And so I think that's one avenue. Could you potentially give some examples of some other ways that we could use other funding sources like Title I or some others to cover some of these expenses?
Yeah, absolutely. So if, you know, as you're implementing, like as Donnie mentioned, you may find things that aren't necessarily covered under this particular funding source. So really having a strategic plan, okay, if these things are important to us, how are we going to do that? So there are different funding sources. You know, in California, how we define our finances, we have unrestricted funding that is provided to us from the state, and then we have restricted, which is all the categorical programs. This would be fall under that restricted. So as we look at this, we look at, okay, what potential, if is it Title I, could it fall under some other expense, looking at there first. And if it doesn't, and it's something that we really feel strongly about, then we do make it an unrestricted expense that we take. But anything that we do, we're very public about it, and we take it to our school board so that they see it and ultimately approve those expenditures. So it's in essence, it's not us making the decision at the local level, but as our governance structure is approving these expenses. And that's really helpful when you're operating on things that you, like I said, you normally don't do, or people may have questions about. It's good to put that forward in the public forum so those questions can be asked and you could do everything up front.
Thank you both. That is super helpful. I want to ask you a specific question about gas cards. And if you could talk a little bit about how that works in your particular district. We had a question come in asking if the gas cards are preloaded, and just curious about the mechanics, no pun intended, of all of that. And I know it's different for each district, but Donnie or Ryan, if you all could talk about how you all handle gas cards.
Sure thing. So again, it really goes to our liaisons working directly with families, and this comes into play when there really is no alternative means. And this is really, that is a direct need attributed to transportation for their child or children to be able to get to school. It's really tied to that importance of the success of their young person getting access to education. And so for us, in the circumstances where a family would get access to a gas card, they are preloaded gas cards specifically for gas stations a gas station in our area. And we do just ask that they do provide the receipt that it was used specifically for gas. That is what we've asked from our families. And again, our liaisons are working very closely with our families that are accessing this particular support on that. And so I hope that addresses the question on that.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. And we had someone offer in the chat. They shared their email. If you want to email them, there's a gas card protocol that they use that they can share. We've also heard examples from other districts. Again, all of this is location specific, but other districts are able to acquire gas cards that limit what you can use that card to purchase. So it is preloaded, but it has a cap on it. And you can also do that for store cards as well in some places. I want to bring in Barbara, if I could, because we have a question about timeline. This question came into the Q&A box, and it says, if we have remaining funding, are we able to use it to purchase gift cards prior to the deadline, if those gift cards will be used after the expenditure deadline?
This is one of those times we can just say yes. The Cards have to be purchased by September 30th, 2024. And good liquidation is January 2025, but specifically on this question in another setting, the U.S. Department of Education said that, yes, the gas cards are one of those things that can be used after the obligation deadline.
Thank you for that. Donnie and Ryan, I want to go back to you. We have more questions about some of your process pieces. One question that came in says, are you distributing food cards to families on a regular basis if the receipts are returned? And what is the amount that you are giving each time?
Again, yeah. So again, our liaisons are really working with the families, and ultimately, this is the access to the store cards are really in extreme cases when there's not able to be any access otherwise in order to support the families, and they may be in an extreme circumstance that they're in. So we do have specific preloaded store cards. We have $50 store cards that we have done specifically for a store in our area, and so that is what we've utilized for that. And again, being able to ask for receipts on that, just again, is that check and balance to ensure that those cards are being used in a way that's meeting the needs of their students and their children and their families. And so there's not a lot of families that are accessing this. This is, again, in an extreme circumstance that our liaisons are determining with our families, and are consulting with our office as well in certain circumstances. And again, trying to always find alternative, more long-term sustainable solutions for our families is the goal.
That's great. Thank you for that. We have another question about, you mentioned purchasing washers and dryers. So could you clarify that those were a purchase for a school or personal homes? And then maybe talk a little bit about how the access to that works.
Yeah, sure. I can definitely do that. So these are specifically for our high schools. So two of our high schools had the appropriate location and hookups, and we were able to assist that. Ryan, do you remember, this was prior to some of the funding that we've gotten. This was a number of years ago, but could you maybe explain on this again as an example of kind of a purchase that isn't normal for a school, how that could, be able to be, what kind of funding sources could be available, or some things to consider when deciding how to help purchase these sorts of items for schools?
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, I think it goes back to, each, obviously the federal resources will impact all of us across the state. But if you're looking at really your local resources that you have, it will vary depending on how that's outlined. In California, we have very clear, we have a local control funding formula, and there's clear outlines on how that money is to be spent. And so we could leverage that as always for this. So some of these expenditures, before we even had the funding, Donnie and his team did tremendous work. We identified what that was and what the impact could be, and we worked with our local school site. So we worked with our high schools, where was the most impact, could we do these, and I believe the first initial expenses for this were just unrestricted. We leveraged some funding that we had, and we put washers and dryers in to resource centers, across. We serve multiple cities, so we were strategic in how we rolled that out. But I think one of the key things here too is, if you're going to be doing things like that, where you're going to be doing resource centers, you want to bring in, like equipment like that, is make sure that you are looping in your facilities people, because there's going to be requirements that they're going to have as well. But those are perfect examples of things that you could do to be creative.
That's great. Thank you so much. I have another question about gas cards and store cards. And folks are curious to know, do you have families complete a form in exchange for those cards?
Yeah, so just in terms of this, as well as our other programs that I had mentioned earlier, we do have forms that families fill out, and just so that there is clarity around what the service is, the purpose of the service, and just to be able to provide, just again, that we're all on the same page in terms of what we're asking in receipt of the services there, specifically to ensure that their children are getting access to the needs that they have, and that this is really specific towards furthering their educational goals. And so yes, on all of our programs, we do have that in place.
That's great. Thank you both. I'm going to turn us to our closing slides now, but really cannot thank you enough, Donnie and Ryan, for giving your time, for everything you're doing in your district. We have Donnie and Ryan's contact information, which they've said it's okay to share, so we'll put that up in just a second. I want to run through some additional resources and announcements for you all while we've still got you. One thing we're really excited about at Schoolhouse is that we have just created an SHC community Slack. If you're familiar with Slack, it's a great way to collaborate and communicate without having to work around Facebook, which some districts firewall or ban. And so we encourage you to sign up. You can use the bit.ly link or this QR code. It's a place, we've already got a robust group who's joined from across states and districts sharing their questions and ideas around using ARP HCY funds in particular. So we encourage you to join that. If you're not familiar with Slack, it is super easy to learn. So we hope that you'll check that out. We also want to let you know that our scholarship program, we want to make sure you are sharing this and promoting this with your students experiencing homelessness who will be starting their post-secondary journey in 2025. So that is the key date there. We want to make sure you share this information widely with any of your students experiencing homelessness as an opportunity, as you can see here, for a financial award, that one-on-one case management support that we talk about, and 3 all-expense paid trips. And our Youth Leadership and Scholars program just does a phenomenal job building relationships and really walking alongside our young scholars through their journey. Some additional resources that you might find useful. Again, you will receive a copy of these slides with all of these hyperlinks. These are also on the Schoolhouse Connection website. The new federal guidance that we've been referencing, there's a link to that, which encourages the expediting of spending ARP HCY funds. Schoolhouse Connection has an ARP HCY resource page. It includes a lot of spotlights from districts like Monterey Peninsula. It also includes our Flexing the Flexibility series, which is also linked here. And we dive a little deep on some topics like transportation, store cards, and motel stays, and highlight how districts across the country have been using their funds for those purposes. Some ways you can connect with us. You can see here we do have a Facebook group. Find us on Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and you can also sign up for our e-news as well, our mailing list. So schoolhouseconnection.org is where you will find all of this information. And I'm going to put our contact information up. And then with that, I will thank Donnie and Ryan again so much. Be on the lookout for this recording in your email and on our archived webinars page. And thank you to our audience for joining and for your wonderful questions today. We appreciate the discussion. Everyone have a great afternoon.